Has NBA media gone too far? LeBron James with some choice words last night after the Lakers win over the Wolves, and plenty of NBA media members responded to what LeBron had to say. Clearly, he doesn't take kindly to the way this sport is currently being covered. I'm Trevor Lane. This is the Basketball Bulletin. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Joining me is Donnie Freeman. Donnie, LeBron against the media. It is a battle that has been waging for decades now. And this is just another chapter in that saga. LeBron clearly not a big fan of the way the sport's covered. And I don't necessarily blame him. We're going to get to his comments, but I don't blame LeBron for what he's saying here.
Yeah, I was going to say, when is this not a battle? But it's typically pretty one-sided. He doesn't give a lot to them to really comment on. Like, for example, I don't know that he's ever responded to Skip. Maybe once, way back, but Skip made a whole career. A lot of these guys have made careers talking about LeBron. So, but this one I don't necessarily agree with or disagree with, excuse me, either.
All right, so here's what LeBron had to say following the Lakers win over the Wolves.
Unfortunate, but I don't know why do you want to be the face of a league when all the people that that cover our game and talk about our game on a day-to-day basis on everybody. I mean, have that responsibility. It's just weird. It's weird energy from the people that I don't know. But Channing, he said it. He said it perfectly. He couldn't say it no better. But Ant said he don't want it. Obviously I didn't ask for it. But I knew there was a responsibility for me. Not only to my family, my friends, my community, and whoever that was going to follow my journey throughout my career. Not only in Ohio when I started there, but all over America and all over the world when I traveled all over the world. So I've always taken that seriously and understood from the beginning what being a professional was all about and being a role model was all about. So try to hold that with the utmost respect and honor, and but I feel I understand. I completely understand. This is weird energy when it comes to that. So
weird energy, LeBron says, and he's talking about Anthony Edwards, who got ejected from last night's game against the Los Angeles Lakers. I talked about that a little bit this morning. I think NBA officials have gotten a little bit too trigger happy with their technical fouls.
That was a backdrop, though, from the All-Star weekend where they asked Ant if he was going to be the face of the league, and he said, no, Wemby's got that, basically.
That's right.
Yeah,
and
that's kind of...
The NBA has pushed Wemby, but they've pushed Anthony Edwards, too. I mean,
Correct.
That's why they had the Lakers open the season against the Wolves as the season to put the spotlight on Anthony Edwards and make him one of the, maybe not the face, but one of the faces of the NBA. But LeBron, his commentary is more about, this is this weird energy with the way the league is covered, with how many people are negative about the league. And I think it's true to a degree because you don't see this necessarily in other sports, the way a lot of these guys, specifically the former players, but not all of them. You also get guys like Stephen A., like Skip, people like that are going to be overly negative and critical of everything. And I don't know, Donnie, what do you attribute all of this to? Because it gets annoying, even from our perspective.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things we could kind of talk about, but we need to get to a word from today's video sponsor first before we do.
That's right. We've got our great sponsor, Prize Picks, Daily Fantasy Sports. A lot of fun to play. And if you use our promo code Bulletin, you get a $50 guarantee on your first $5 played. We're going to make a few picks here. Everybody use that code Bulletin. Again, use the link in the description down below as well. Donnie, let's take a peek here. Go look around the league on a Friday evening. I always like these ones that are a little bit easier to win. Evan Mobley, 11.5 points. Yes, please. Yes, I'll take that all day against the Boston Celtics. Let's go Cavs. Let's see. What else are we liking out there?
You like that Strus number?
Can I take two? I don't know. Maybe we can. Can we take two? I guess we can. 4.5 points. Yeah, I think Max Strus can definitely get that. Yeah. And then let's see what else we can get here, because we got to pick somebody from a different team as well. You have to pick multiple teams. So let's find. You want to go Trae Young, 37 points, rebounds, and assists against OKC. That's
top defense in the league. That one's going to be kind of tricky. But
Yeah.
he's also the only guy that really can get his own. So maybe. I don't know. Less, I think it's safer.
Okay, let's go there. Everybody, if you agree, you can check it out again. Prize Picks, we got a $10 entry. We have some easier numbers to hit on this one. So $10 would win $23 on this one. Go check out Prize Picks. Use that promo code Bulletin. Get a guaranteed $50 on your first $5 played. All right, Donnie. So what are we thinking on this whole topic with LeBron here?
I don't necessarily think he's wrong. Like we were saying, I agree with him. I do think that a lot of people that cover the league, that talk about it on a national level, spend a lot of time highlighting negatives and spend a lot of time talking bad about the sport. And the weird thing is that like you can break it down a bunch of different ways, because sometimes those are players, former and current. I mean, think Draymond. I don't know if you saw him during the All-Star game. He was just ripping and raving about the All-Star weekend not being there, not being something that like on the All-Star day for the previous guys, like talking about how this all sucks and this and that. Like, and I don't necessarily have an opinion on that. I don't really care, to be honest, but I just think it's a bad look to have him go on there and just rip the game like that. Like, I think that it just happens consistently with this sport. And I don't think it happens like that or that way across many other sports. But for some reason with NBA, they typically try to do the negative angle. Charles Barkley, who I think a lot of people thought that LeBron's comments were targeted towards him and his show. He oftentimes comes on there and says some crazy stuff, and I don't really think they watch any basketball aside from the games that they're probably covering on that day. I don't think they watch a single game, because they go on there and they say things that imply they don't watch any of the games. Like they didn't know the Lakers were a good team, for example, this year. Like, but they'll obviously still come on and say their things that they've got to say about it, because that's kind of just what their job is, and that's what they're supposed to do from that perspective. But I just don't think it's a great look when you've got all these people that are kind of just talking bad about the product, and that's more or less what LeBron is saying.
Well, and people are, you get these complaints about, well, why are ratings down? And that's a much bigger conversation. I think the ratings thing is a little bit overblown, frankly, but why are ratings down? Well, what happens when every time somebody turns on their TV to watch NBA, all they're hearing about is how bad the NBA is? Well, people are going to start to buy into that. Part of that is just in our society right now, outrage sells. It's the way that it goes. If you are upset about something and you want to point at something and scream about how ridiculous it is, well, you know what? Sometimes that's warranted, but we also know that tends to sell, and so people now find stuff to be outraged about. I was upset the other day with Paul George's ridiculous comments about winning or about focusing on a championship with the 76ers. Sometimes there's things where people say stuff that's so insane that you have no choice but to be a little bit perturbed about it. But I think we go over the top looking for these things to be negative about, because we know it will get a reaction. We know it will get a reaction out of people, and that's what we're seeing, I think, in the media. But there's another piece to this too. And some of this, and when we're looking at former players, it's that the game has changed so much. The game, I mean, go watch a game from 20 years ago. It doesn't look like the same sport. It looks so different compared to how the game is played today. So if you're a player from a few decades ago and you're not watching something you're familiar with. You're watching a game played a very, very different way than when you were coming up. And it falls back into the hole. When I was a kid, I walked uphill both ways in the snow, right? And all this, and this generation has it easy and all that kind of stuff, right? That's been perpetuated for all of human history, right? We've had this element where people in a certain generation, they look back on the generations before them and they say, oh, they've got it easier than we do. And that, I think, is playing out here at the NBA level, in part because players from years past see a different game than the way they played it. And so they assume that that's got to be worse, that it's because players today are softer. It's not as good as it used to be. It's just not the same. Different doesn't mean bad. But I think we jump to that conclusion too much. And so it's easy for players who see something different from what they're familiar with to have a negative perception of it, because the game is simply not played the same way as it used to be.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think that's why you can explain a lot of the older guys, like you were saying, from past generations, the way that they covered the league or talk about it on their own personal platforms, etc. But going back to Draymond, because he was just a ball of energy during that weekend. Another thing he said was that he also thinks the game is boring now because there's not a lot of guys that approach the game the way that LeBron does, for example, and that methodical way that LeBron approaches games. And it's just a lot of running and 3-point shooting and things like that, which I thought was mildly ironic because,
well, he's with the Warriors that helped change all the way the game's played. Sure.
But he also said that too. And so I think that's another piece. Like, we could really talk about ratings, product, all these other things for quite a while, as we've done before in the past. But another piece of it too is that, like, the league constantly is getting talked about because, all they do is jack up threes, this and that. I was listening to the Channing Frye, Richard Jefferson podcast that LeBron references there, and they were saying, well, everyone's complaining about all these threes. Well, guess which teams are the most watched? The ones that take all the threes. So, like, there's a bunch of teams that take much less than that, for example, but we hyper focus on that. And then we've said before in the past that a lot of teams take different approaches to get to some of these shots. They're not just running down and dribble, pull up 30 times a night. They're doing different things. A lot of it is drive, kick, read, react, that type of stuff. But I just think that the entirety of the league has kind of been talked about in such a way for so long that it just portrays a very negative outlook. And then it turns into word of mouth. Oh, I don't like the NBA because XYZ. And then people start saying these things that they've heard as talking points for the last 6, 7, 8 years, but they're not watching any of the product either. So it just kind of keeps going and evolving from there. And I think it's really, really interesting because I think also, circling back to the initial point with the media themselves, like I was saying in the very beginning, there's a lot of guys that have made careers just flat out talking bad about LeBron and the sport.
Made themselves a lot of money. Yeah.
That's another piece of this too, is that really turned into like the hot take culture. All that stuff is just negative. And Stephen A also implied on his show when he responded to this that the media has done basically nothing to harm the sport. He implied that the players have done it because of lack of effort and things like that. But I don't know if that's true either. I think there's a lot that the media has done and talked about. And it's weird because you don't want to say, hey, Draymond, don't get on there and call the product amazing if you don't think it's amazing. Like, speak the truth. But at the same time, if everyone's shitting on the product, then what's the average person going to think when they hear that? Like, it's a crappy product. So, and we could talk about that too, like blackouts and all this. I don't think it's the best product personally. I don't love the play-by-play for a lot, like the national stuff. But still.
Well, I think there's two things here that need to be true. Is that and ultimately it's where a lot of life lands, and that's in a place of moderation. You could be negative about the NBA. It's okay, because you know what it is. If you're not occasionally negative about the NBA, is you're coming from a place of dishonesty. That's what happens. If you want to be only negative or you want to be only positive, it's a place of dishonesty. Because let's face it, we're living in a very in-between zone with this league. There are incredible things happening in this league. As you said, there are terrible things happening too. There are things that you look at and you say, oh my God, this needs to change. But you know what? That will always be the case, because the NBA, like all sports leagues, it is a living thing. It will never be completed. It's never going to be finished. There will never be a point where we say the sport is perfect, it's done, change nothing. That will never happen. We are always going to be making changes and adjusting and adapting as players change, as styles change, as strategies change. The league has to be flexible. It's a living thing. And so there will always be room for criticism and negativity in the NBA and in sports in general. That inherently isn't a bad thing. When it's negativity just for the sake of negativity, when it's negativity coming from a place of dishonesty because you're just trying to farm outrage, that's where it's a problem. That's where it's a problem, when all you are is negative and you don't highlight all the positives. And I'll tell you what, this sport is amazing, Donnie. This sport is incredible. I think it's the greatest sport in the world. And the reason for that, the reason why you see some of these former players and such that complain about it because it looks so different is because we don't spend enough time highlighting what makes this so awesome. Are there times when we wish the players would play harder, like the All-Star game? Yeah. Are there times where it gets a little too formulaic in terms of the three-point shooting and how those shots are generated? Sure, especially to the casual observers, it can look like teams are just spamming the same type of play over high pick and roll, high pick and roll, high pick and roll over and over and over again. But at the same time, my God, have you spent any time watching off-ball defense? Maybe it's not the most exciting or thing to look at, but that's where we come into play, where people need to do a better job thinking about how many screens did that defender just have to run through in order to stay on his man and do something that will never show up in a box score, that they're never going to get any credit for? We need to spend more time highlighting that, how difficult it is to play in today's NBA right now, the amount of movement on the court compared to 20 years ago. These guys are moving so much more than they did decades ago. You look at how intricate offense is. You look at how talented these players are. The talent level is through the roof. The things they're pulling off. We can be critical of the sport, but it needs to be in moderation. And the problem that we run into is too many people are all in on that negative side, and they don't go to lengths to explain what it is that makes the sport special as well. And I think that is where you get to a point of honesty, where you're talking about the positives and the negatives in a real and just truthful way. Instead, we get everybody just looking for 1 minute sound bites, say something as ridiculous as possible, as outrageous as possible, that's going to get a reaction. And that is the current state of media. And that is what LeBron James is complaining about.
Yeah. And to your point, circling back to LeBron's initial comment, as the face of the league, you bear the brunt of that. Especially, LeBron's kind of a unique one because everything with him, expectation wise, his own comments, like let's not deflect blame from him, his own comments calling himself the GOAT. Sure. There's just a higher standard when it comes to LeBron, and he's highly scrutinized, most polarizing player probably ever. So it's a little bit different. But as the face of the NBA, you are going to be the sponge for a lot of that criticism and all these other things. And there are legitimate things you can say if you're on the opposite side and say LeBron didn't do this or that maybe hurt something. Like, for example, I don't care much about All-Star Weekend, but him never doing a dunk contest probably did hurt the dunk contest. Like, okay, but that doesn't really have a long-term impact on his own individual legacy, in my opinion. I don't think that matters all that much, but it probably did deter other stars from that specific showcase. But the whole situation just kind of weird. So I can understand why LeBron is saying, I didn't really want this, but I understood the responsibility of it all and kind of acted appropriately for that. And I can understand why Ant wouldn't want it, because all they do is kind of talk crap about us. And so the NBA also, in my opinion, doesn't really put the product out there in a way where they're highlighting these things at all. Like I said earlier, even on like play-by-play stuff, they don't really talk about like what we're actually seeing. They're just kind of reacting, oh, well, you know, this and that. It would be nice if it was more like football where they're like, okay, here's what they're doing, this and that a little bit more, but the NBA doesn't really do all that. Yeah, like they don't, but maybe they just kind of have a formula that they think works. So maybe that's the argument. But altogether, I think it's all kind of weird, just the whole portrayal of the league in general.
It is. I do think it's overly negative. I do think the negativity sells, and that's part of why all of this kind of becomes this thing, right? This is not the only area of life or the only area of media where we see negativity becoming the driving factor. But I just think it's important that we are able to look at the positives as well. I don't think you have to be constantly positive about the NBA, nor should you be. And that's, you know, LeBron. But as LeBron's point is, hey, we like, if you're going to be the face of the NBA, yes, you're going to get a lot of negativity, but it shouldn't all just be negative, right? There should be the positive side of it as well. And you know what? Sometimes, like, how many times have we talked about, oh my God, LeBron is doing this and he's 40 years old. Can you believe it? Right? Like there's been a lot of positivity as well with stuff like that, but there are certain media members that just consistently go negative. A lot of it is nostalgia is a powerful thing, and they look at today's game as not being as good, and I think that's just not grounded in reality. They look at today's game as not being as good as the past, and again, that's due to nostalgia, but this is an unfortunate thing for the NBA to have to deal with, where the players feel like the people that are covering it are out to get them rather than give an honest take on what it is that's happening in the sport, or at least coming at it from a point of wanting to make the league better. Constructive criticism is a very powerful thing and a very valuable thing if it's coming from an honest and truthful place where you want the league to be better. And that's not the sense you get from some of the people in NBA media right now. So I do think change is needed, but you know what? LeBron James talking about stuff like this, it's only going to shine a light on like, hey, yeah, we are getting too negative. Let's talk about some of the positives as well and cover the league that way. And remember, maybe remember just how much fun this damn sport is.
You'd hope, but they may double down and go the opposite way.
They kind of did, and in some of a lot of the talks today, didn't they? There were a lot of people who went, "Oh no! The media isn't a problem at all. No, it's you, LeBron. It's the players. And they took it as an opportunity to double down. Man, that's frustrating.
Yeah, when LeBron says something, though, one thing is for sure, it does catch ears and people do listen when he says something because, like I said in the very beginning, he doesn't really respond, particularly to the media or talk about the media all too often. So they definitely take notice. So hopefully going forward, they listen and try to cover the league a little bit better. As long like they don't have to get on there and lie. I don't want them to get on there and lie.
No.
They can have an honest opinion, but Wendy was on the show with Stephen A earlier today with his reaction saying he does think things like you were saying have skewed a little bit too far into just negative territory all the time, where that's the default approach to the league is just negativity first and then everything else second. So I do think that is something that they could probably work on as a whole across the board, and we'll see what happens. But I think you broke it down perfectly today while I was all over the place because there's just so much to talk about with this.
Dude, we could talk about this for hours. And this is media, right? So it's one of the things we get that this is like the perfect cross section because it's basketball and media, and we get to and I've got opinions on all of it. So
we could go for a long time. We went for 20 minutes today, so
we did. Everybody, though, I'm curious to know what everybody else thinks. Give us your thoughts in the comment section down below, and don't forget to go check out our latest video right now. Till then, everybody, see ya and stay safe.